Hi, I'm Nadia. Welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. Um, Today's Ukrainian update on the day. Russia launched a barrage of drones and missiles. Uh-huh. Hello, welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Nadia. And updates for Ukraine today. Hi, Linda, Fabiani, and Siobhan. Welcome to Broadcasting Scotland.
Hiya.
Hi, Nadia.
Ukraine update. Russia launched a barrage of drones and missiles against Ukraine on Saturday, killing at least 15. I'll just read it. Russia launched a barrage. I'm sorry about that. Russia launched a barrage of drones and missiles against Ukraine on Saturday, killing at least 15 people and damaging dozens of residential buildings as well as energy infrastructure across the country. Ukrainian officials said in the central city of Poltava, a Russian missile struck a residential building, killing 11 people and wounding 16, including 4 children. Ukraine's emergency services said, adding that 22 people were rescued from rubble and emergency crews worked well into the night. In Kharkiv, northeastern Ukraine, 1 person was killed and 4 wounded in a drone attack, the mayor said. Police officers were killed during attacks as they patrolled streets in a village in the northeastern region of Sumy, regional officials said. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia used missiles, attack drones, and aerial bombs in carrying out the overnight attacks on Ukraine. Russian forces struck a boarding school housing people preparing for evacuation in a part of Russia's Kursk region held by Ukrainian forces, killing at least 4 people on Saturday. Ukrainian's military said the Ukrainian military's general staff said on Saturday that as of 10 p.m. rescue efforts were proceeding and 84 people had been rescued from the rubble or received medical assistance, with 4 of the injured in a serious condition. A Ukrainian drone attack killed a civilian in Russian region of Belgorod, bordering Ukraine, the regional governor said on Sunday. An explosion at a Ukrainian army recruitment center in the western city of Rivne killed 1 person and wounded 6, police said. Authorities did not say what caused the explosion at 4:15 p.m. local time on Saturday or reveal details on the casualties. A man with a hunting rifle shot dead on a Ukrainian army recruitment soldier and escaped with a conscript on Saturday before both were caught by police, authorities said. The recruitment official was escorting mobilized men to a training center and had stopped at a petrol station in Poltava region when the incident took place. Police have launched a murder inquiry. Moscow claimed its forces were pressing in the key eastern Ukrainian city of Toretsk, whose capture would enable Russia to obstruct Ukrainian supply routes. The US wants Ukraine to hold elections, potentially by the end of the year, especially if Kiev can agree to a truce with Russia in the coming months, Keith Kellogg, Donald Trump's top Ukraine official, has said. President Zelensky said excluding Ukraine from talks between the US and Russia about the war in Ukraine would be very dangerous, and asked for more discussions between Kiev and Washington to develop a plan for a ceasefire. Speaking to the Associated Press on Saturday, the Ukrainian president said Russia did not want to engage in ceasefire talks to discuss any kind of concessions, which the Kremlin interpreted as losing at a time when its troops had the upper hand on the battlefield. On Saturday, the UN condemned a Russian missile attack on southern Ukrainian port city of Odessa that wounded at least 7 people and damaged historic buildings. UNESCO said it condemns the missile attack on historic center of Odessa last night, a World Heritage Site, severely damaging at least 2 cultural buildings placed under UNESCO Convention's protection. Linda and Siobhan, you have heard this Ukraine update, and can you please see, what you'd like to talk about this?
Oh, well, I'm just appalled at Trump, Yeah, everything the man does appalls me, I have to say. But in
Yeah.
this particular case, the very idea of cutting Ukraine out of any ongoing discussion is a terrible, terrible precedent to set, because what it's saying is that bullies always win. So, Russia invades Ukraine, but Ukraine doesn't get to talk in any potential peace deals, etc., because it's all down to the two men who consider themselves the leaders of the world and the strongest in the world. And I think it's terribly, terribly damaging to any kind of diplomatic relationships in the future. So that worries me hugely. I
Yeah.
don't know. Siobhan will feel the same. I know she feels the same as I do about Trump.
I mean, absolutely, there is nothing that man does that's edifying in any way. And in addition to kind of removing or attempting to remove Ukraine from those peace talks, of course, there is they say temporary removal of USA aid from Ukraine for 90 days, which has obviously left Ukraine in absolute shock and scrambling to find some additional funding. That aid is economic assistance as well as humanitarian assistance as well. So there's a real push on Ukraine by Trump. I think at this moment in time, it's not just removing them from the talks. It feels a wee bit like there's a discussion to carve up the globe between the dictators, the male
Mm.
dictators, by the way. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for that. And shall we move on to the next topic, which is Gaza and Middle East? At least 47,487 Palestinians have been killed and 111,588 wounded in Gaza since 7th October 2023. As phase one of the ceasefire in Gaza continues, Israel and Hamas exchanged more hostages under the coordination of International Committee of the Red Cross. Arab foreign ministers have met and reject Donald Trump's call to ethnically cleanse Gaza. So, Siobhan, would you like to go for it?
Yes, I mean, I there is a piece of sorts at this moment in time, but I was reading this morning that Netanyahu is on his way to the US to thank Trump for basically, suppressing Hamas. So certainly Netanyahu doesn't see it as a peace accord, he sees it as a defeat. And I think that that's probably important in terms of language as well. And I'm going to kind of touch on this ethnic cleansing because, there was an element during the election, I think, that the Democrat vote was somewhat split because of their perhaps kind of not particularly useful positioning on the Israeli invasion of Palestine, but actually it's that element now of Trump's in power and careful what you wish for, because here he is actually talking about ethnic cleansing. And I'm going to go back to the USA aid as well, because Jordan is one of the particular benefactors of USA aid, which is now being suspended. And of course, Jordan is one of the countries which Donald Trump is saying you must take the Palestinians as part of an ethnic cleansing process, which of course the Arab countries have said absolutely not. We will not be party to that. But it's beginning to look like this removal of USA aid is as Linda said, a Boolean tactic to get countries to bend to his will. He said in an interview, Donald Trump, they will do it. That's all he kept saying. I will guarantee they will do it. We give them enough, they will do it. So there's a real Boolean push, which is fundamentally trying to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people. And we've saw this invasion over the last year and a bit, and it was almost a test case in morality as to what countries will get away with. And here's the situation where it's almost been normalised now by the media in terms of that ethnic cleansing that Donald Trump is now presenting.
Linda?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I second what Siobhan's saying, and I won't repeat all that because we're in agreement about, Netanyahu is a bully as well, so here we are.
Mm.
And I think there's long been a desire on behalf of some elements in Israeli politics that they believe in the ethnic cleansing of Gaza because they want the land. So that's ongoing. Meanwhile, the level of discussion just below that high level stuff, we have all these people who have, well, killed. You gave the figures, Nadia. We have people injured. We're only now starting to see the absolute extent of the devastation that has taken place in Gaza, and the sight of all these people thinking they were going home and terrified about what they would find. And let's face it, they didn't find much because there wasn't much left. So the humanitarian aid has to be stepped up. The medical aid.
Do you think this ceasefire is the end of everything, or do you think this will come back? And
No, I worry more than once a day. I'm worried about this ceasefire because I think it's so delicate. There's also a bit of the cynic in me that says there are those, and if I'm being entirely impartial, I would say there are those on both sides, probably more on one side than the other, who would actually think it's in their interest for the ceasefire not to hold. So I'm very, very worried about it. It is fragile. And one of the big worries is, I mentioned earlier that people didn't really know what they were going back to, and we are now just seeing the extent of the damage. Part of that was about journalists being barred. I mean, I know, as Siobhan said, the mainstream media that we have is not giving a full picture, but there are decent journalists out there who are trying to tell the proper story, who are trying to have the truth put on record. And the fact that they're not allowed in and still not allowed in is a huge concern for the Palestinians, but also for democracy ongoing. Because how are we supposed to know the truth of things if we don't have good people there who are able to portray that truth for the rest of us? So the whole situation there is a wee bit of optimism because the day-to-day killing, to that extent that it was going on, has stopped. But I'm not hugely optimistic that this will carry on in a peaceful way.
thank you, Linda. Now let's move on to the next topic about Trump and US. So you might have read about or heard about the tariffs. Linda, would you like to go talk about that?
Oh my goodness. I'm absolutely just sickened by the man. I probably don't have the word strong enough, or certainly that I could say over an open airwave. But he's now imposed these tariffs on Canada, right? His nearest neighbour, an ally, a very strong ally, two nations that have been party to a free trade agreement that was only revisited a few years ago. It's not that long ago, an agreement's made, and he just rips things up to what suits him. And he's done the same with Mexico, and he's now taken on China. I am not sure that he has properly foreseen what could happen with this in terms of damaging his own nation, damaging the US, because there are so many joint ventures, particularly between Canada and the US, but also with Mexico and the US. And of course, we know that China's involved in everything. So there could be unforeseen circumstances and unforeseen things that will happen due to these tariffs. I mean, we've yet to see the retaliation from these three nations, although it has started. I know that the current Prime Minister of Canada has been quite bullish about this. But we have to look at what he's doing in the future as well. He's already said he's going to do the same in Europe. Of course he is. I'm in danger of repeating myself all the time, but it is that big man syndrome. Look at me, I'm a big man. I can do absolutely everything I want. I am the strongest man in the world. And all these acolytes he's got round about him that are looking for benefit from that. So give it a wee while longer, and some Americans that haven't seen it so far will start to see the results of some of the stuff he's doing both externally, like the
Yeah,
tariffs, but
yeah,
also
very true.
internally,
Very true. Yeah.
the way he's
What
hammering
about
public service. There
yeah,
is so much going on.
yeah, and also there is another thing about Trump, the diversity and equality, and
Yes.
the mention which he had made on the plane crash and everything. Siobhan and Linda, would you like to discuss on that?
Yeah, I mean, just for clarity, Justin Trudeau has announced over the last couple of hours that he is retaliating by imposing 25% tariff on American goods as well. So there's the beginning of that
All right.
retaliation happening. Yeah. So this is the beginning of the trade wars now, isn't it? Which is kind of like, I think the thing with Trump is that we we know that he does not like meet what should we say, traditional presidential criteria, but we often try and apply that. There's no reason behind Donald Trump's actions, if that makes sense. But I think the thing with Donald Trump is that he's all about chaos. He is literally just about getting us into this vortex of chaos and discord and uncertainty, and that's what he's now pulling us into and across the board. Nadia, you mentioned that crash, which was a horrific event, which was seized upon by Donald Trump in a most horrific way, and blaming equality, diversity, and inclusion as well. Now, behind the scenes of that, of course, he's just removed all federal funding for any project that is promoting, embedding equality, diversity, and inclusion across the board. And also with the caveat that anyone who sees any other member of that team embed inequality and what was it said under disguise will be met with consequences. So basically there's a threat for those who are trying to still embed that equality within the federal government. So we've got that structure there, and I think that was used as the fact that he used such an event for political mileage was disgusting in itself,
Yeah.
but also the fact that this comes at the back of removal of the federal funding that which attempts to embed and actually assess what equality measures across the US as well. Uh, I mean, there's a whole raft of stuff that Donald Trump is doing. The union for one of the large unions for kind of civil servants in the US are saying that this equality and diversity is really just a smoke screen to get rid of a whole host of civil service that are not considered loyal, and that looks like it is. It's been classed as revenge tactics on behalf of Donald Trump, and that's only one element of the things that he's doing as well. I mean, we could talk the whole hour and beyond of the kind of raft of things that Donald Trump has brought in immediately to sow discord, disruption.
And Trump
Linda
is
mentioned
sacking
trade.
the federal government employees and those who are not loyal to him.
Yes.
That is also there.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next topic, which is Rachel Reeves' ABS growth mission. And if the headline of the mission for growth is airport runway, that would be 5 years to build. Perhaps Rachel Reeves not grasp the urgency of the situation. So shall we talk about the growth mission Rachel Reeves have announced, and also the $2 billion for the football club? And there is nothing for Scotland and no mention of Grangemouth refinery. Can you please let's discuss on that? Siobhan, would you
Well,
like to go first?
Oh, no,
Or Linda, if
I'll
you want to go
Linda.
first.
oh, sorry.
Yep.
Right.
No,
Okay.
Linda, please.
Do you know, Siobhan and I have always got so much to say and everything. Okay, yeah, I'm just sickened by Labour generally since they come in this promise of change, but it's only change for a few. You know, they used to have this thing, this catchphrase, a strap line that used to say that, you know, it was for the many, it was for everybody. Well, it doesn't look that way now. When you look at the map of Rachel Reeves' announcements, there's a very clear South of England thing going on. I just, I had a wee look at some of the things that Scotland has had cancelled that are not benefiting Scotland, and it's quite interesting. More or less immediately. Well, for a start, there's the Acorn carbon capture stuff that's now in the north of England. I read that the UK government, a Labour government, have given a loan guarantee to Ineos for a petrochemical plant in Europe. Meanwhile, they've done sod all for Grangemouth. There's the exascale computer project. And she's talking now about, this great corridor between Oxford and Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge, for lordy me, have they not got enough? And then, of course, there's the biggie. And it ties in with the thing about the extra runway at Heathrow and the other airport stuff she's talking about, all down south. The cancellation that the Tories did of HS2. To me, there was a great opportunity there for Labour to be truly levelling up across the country, because this was originally supposed to open up things to the north, but they scrapped these legs. So what you now have is an excellent commuter service for London and round about. It's appalling what's happened there. And I've actually seen the groundwork and stuff that has already gone ahead down there, the clearing of areas for HS2 that's now been cancelled. I would have thought that was a very sensible thing for Labour to look at reinstating, to the benefit across the UK, which they say they care about. But no, they haven't done that. Levelling up, fuel prices. Meanwhile, all Labour want to do is exploit Scotland's renewable potential. It smacks of what happened to our oil, now it's our renewables. When you look at what they've done to the WASPy women, not only that, there's another element of that. They totally ignored the Ombudsman. We were talking about precedents earlier. That's a dangerous precedent as well. Not to mention the hypocrisy that's involved with all these Labour people who were all standing there in support. Another big thing, they have backed the Tory attack on devolution through this thing called the Internal Markets Act. They have backed that, said they will not reverse it. They are damaging devolution. They've allowed the Tories to damage devolution. They are now carrying on with it. There's no levelling up for Scotland, as far as I can see. And you mentioned the football ground. Yeah, that just about sums it up, really.
Yep. Siobhan?
Oh God, there's so much to say on this issue in terms of their economic model. I'm actually going to. I was reading the new Joseph Rowntree Foundation report this morning, in terms of child poverty and the predictions of child poverty. You'll be aware, of course, that it's predicted to rise across the board, except for in Scotland, where our policies are more robust and anti-poverty friendly. And here's my point, because this is what the Joseph Rowntree Foundation are saying: growth will not, even at its best factor, the most growth we can have, it will not resolve child poverty. It will still not decrease, even if the UK manage its best growth predictions. So there's an element here of Reeves is rumoured to have gone into the cabinet and said growth. Well, growth doesn't resolve the social issues that we're having. It's economic growth, as Linda said, not for the many, but for the few. We're talking about these grand gestures that look like financial growth might be on the kind of horizon, but it doesn't resolve the social issues of inequality and the removal of child poverty across the board. In fact, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation are very clear that in actual fact, high poverty levels are a barrier to growth, because what you end up with is children's readiness for school being impacted, the ability to learn, the impact on the NHS in terms of poverty and health. So this becomes an impact on growth, as well as not an attempt not to resolve the poverty issues. We are going to be talking about Brexit, but there is a Brexit barrier to growth as well. So there's an element here that she's coming up with these kind of, just that kind of growth. But the barriers in terms of making growth are there, and they're not removing those barriers. They're pretending that those barriers don't exist. More, I think, insidiously is the fact that it's all about the growth. It's all about that trickle-down theory, that somehow eventually poorer children and deprived children will finally get the spills. As the Joseph Rowntree Foundation said, it is deeply unfair to expect people to sit around and wait for economic growth while they're in difficulty now.
There is another thing about the 2 billion investment for the Old Trafford
Yeah.
football stadium. And when Labour was going for the election, they promised they will do everything for Greensmith refinery, and there is nothing for the refinery. And the same owner of the refinery, they are giving 2 billion fund. And that all says that there is nothing for Scotland. Like whatever the promise they have made for Scotland, it's not going to be there for Scotland. It's just vacuum promises, right? So would you like to talk
Yeah.
about that? There are
Well, yeah,
thousands of jobs are going to lose in this Greensmith refinery, but
yeah,
they are not
yeah.
mentioning about it. Yeah,
No,
Linda. Yeah.
as I said earlier, all they seem to want to do is exploit Scotland, our
Yeah.
renewable potential, etc. And as we've said, giving this loan guarantee to INEOS for mainland Europe, meanwhile just dumping on Grangemouth. And yeah, I would bring it back to Scottish Labour here.
Hmm.
Um, how do they feel as a Scottish branch office of UK Labour? How do all the individuals that are sitting on the benches at Holyrood, that are sitting in council chambers across Scotland, how do they square this in their minds that they fought for a Labour government, that they went out there and supported people, the likes of Waspie, that they promised the world to Scotland and probably believed it themselves, and now it's just been kicked back in their faces? How do they feel as individuals? Surely there must be a bit of them that says, here we are, getting dropped completely. Here is the nation that we represent being dropped completely. Here we have a Scottish government under the SNP that believes in independence, that, as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation said, is doing the best they can in relation to child poverty, which making a difference in child poverty in Scotland with the limited resources that we have under devolution. Surely there's a bit of these individuals that says, here, wait a minute, we could actually do a bit better if we were
Hmm.
doing this on our own. And, I would just I would forgive everything if the Labour Party in Scotland would come out for independence. I would forgive them the years of snash that we've had to take in terms of Scotland being too poor, too wee, too stupid to go it alone. If they would come out and say, do you know what? To look after the people that we say we represent, we need
Yeah.
independence. I would welcome them with open arms. And surely some of them must be on the verge of that. They
Be-
must be. They're not stupid people.
because of course what we got was an Anna Sarwar patronising speech all throughout the election saying, I know that you want independence, but that was only because the Tories were in power. Let us
Yeah,
go in power, and I promise you that independence will not be, you'll not need it anymore. It'll not be something that the people of Scotland will want. Of course, that's kind of backfiring on them. But I
yeah,
think much more importantly and much more worryingly is that the decline of Labour and the complete and utter immediate disillusionment in Labour is actually beginning to facilitate reform, and that
yes,
is deeply
yes,
concerning because I worried about Labour. Their policy and their utter inability to govern was kind of deeply problematic, and we saw that reform were sitting in the wings waiting to scoop up those disillusioned and actually sometimes very vulnerable communities that have nowhere else to turn. So there's a deeply worrying trend here, and if Labour doesn't sort this, then reform are a real threat, and then
Yeah,
everything's off the
yeah,
cards. We
yeah,
have a Trump.
yeah.
yeah,
Talking about reform and threat, and this point, the next topic, Siobhan has touched it a bit. It's about Brexit. In the room for 5 years, on UK economy has lost billions as a result of Brexit, and Siobhan has touched on this and about the freedom of movement and everything. Siobhan, you had touched about Brexit when we were discussing Rachel Reeves' ABS. So would you like to talk about it? It's been 5 years and we are losing billions and we will lose again.
Yeah. I mean, there's two elements. I think there's the economic element, but there's also the ideological shift, and
Yes,
I can
yes,
talk
yeah.
about that a little bit later as well. But I was looking at the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, and they did a bit of an analysis of where we're at 5 years down the line, and basically they're saying we're the only European country that's never really got back to our pre-pandemic economic levels. The uncertainty of Brexit is still causing massive problems for investment within the UK. And I think it says something like since 2016, at least 30% of firms have consistently identified Brexit as one of their top three concerns, peaking at 55% in 2020. So that uncertainty is causing massive problems in terms of investment. Labour shortages is another issue, of course, the higher costs. But what the kind of Institute of Economic and Social analysis suggested is that there's other crises that we've had. We've had COVID, we've had the cost of living crisis, we've had the 2008 economic crisis as well. But Brexit is structural and ingrained in our economic system now. So it's actually in the bones of the UK economy. So there's no resolution to that. They've estimated that our investment could have been something like 12.4% higher had we not left had we not left the European Union. So there's massive economic disadvantages to us. It was self-harm. That was what it was, wasn't it? It was a moment of deep self-harm, what we did. And we go back to Rachel Reeves and this kind of notion of growth, 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 but they refuse to understand or even entertain the possibility that Brexit is one of the huge barriers to the economic growth that they're actually seeking. It is utter madness that they're considering this economic growth and not even considering that Brexit might be one of those factors. The other level, of course, is the ideological shift to the right that
Yeah.
Brexit facilitated quite horrifyingly. We remember Nigel Farage, and it's only got worse since
Yes, the
then, as we're
mastermind.
seeing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And Linda, Brexit and also the reform rise. People of Scotland hopefully will remember like what's happening with Scotland because of the Brexit. And as Siobhan has said, a surge in
Yeah.
reform. And I don't understand. Linda, would you like to talk about it?
Yeah, well, yeah. But the thing is, we should always remember that Scotland voted overwhelmingly against Brexit. So
Yes.
that gives us hope. When you look at the YouGov poll that came out about Brexit on the 5th-year anniversary across the UK, and it's saying that 55% of those polled said that Brexit was wrong. And I think there was 18% of those who voted for Brexit are now saying it was wrong and they shouldn't have. So people are recognising that's the case. And I would hope that if you actually did a Scotland study, the figures would be way beyond that because we did vote against it. However, when you look at the rise of reform and Farage, we shouldn't forget that there's been a strong Tory vote in Scotland. We kid ourselves on sometimes that it's not there. There's been a strong Tory vote in Scotland for decades. Long, long, long time. And a lot of that Tory vote is now shifting to reform. Because you see another poll that came out, that showed independence still at sort of 50-50, that showed the SNP on track to be the biggest party in the next Holyrood election. It showed Labour and Tories way down. Now, there's a sort of natural move to reform by some former Tory voters. The big concern is that some Labour voters might move to reform.
Yes,
Um,
yeah. And but like
because
when
they
you
see
coming
something
back to the
different,
Brexit,
something new. And that's a
people
concern.
have overwhelmingly, as you said, Linda, have voted for, to remain in EU. The Scottish people have voted. But it's been 5 years, and we have seen, their detrimental effect of like this Brexit has produced to us. And I hope, what's your view on it? People have to remember about the Brexit and reform, and what they have done to us, and coming. Do you think like we should go back to when we are, should go back to EU, and like what do you think? How
Well,
we
I
can
think
if we want to.
there's two elements of it. There's a UK element, and then there's the Scotland element. So in the UK element, I am at a loss to understand why Starmer and his cronies aren't in much more detailed discussions with Europe about trying to alleviate some of the mess that was left by Labour. After all, Keir Starmer was a huge advocate for Remain. We shouldn't forget that. But they don't seem to be that interested in talking about it. What is it they're doing? Are they trying to maintain the votes they got that were Brexit votes? So that's the UK element. But as far as the Scottish element is concerned, I absolutely believe that the case for Scotland being an independent country back into the European Union gets stronger all the time.
Yes.
When you look at what's happening in Scotland, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in Europe, what's happening worldwide. And I think the EU, they're giving much kinder words, much softer approaches to the UK now. I believe that Scotland would be welcomed with open arms as an independent country back into the European Union. And I want that kind of partnership. I want a strong European Union where we're looking after each other, where we, because we're in a very small part of the world, Europe, and looking to support each other and be good global players within the world. And I think people in Scotland would go for that. I think you'll always have the hardcore Brexiteers, a small amount, like there will always be a hardcore who would vote for the likes of reform. But I think Scotland in general would be very amenable to going back into the EU, either as part of the UK, but when the realisation comes that the UK is not doing anything for Scotland, an independent Scotland could become a full member.
Thank you so much. And Siobhan, would you like to add anything more into it before we get into the next topic?
I mean, maybe a little bit more negatively in terms of the European Union. It's not the institution that we left. I think that the rise of the right is causing problems within the European Union as well. I was listening to Yanis Varoufakis the other day, and he made a very interesting point. He says, when you think of kind of America, you think of various countries. If you think of the European Union, there's no immediate name or leader that now springs to mind, and where we had Angela Merkel and those kind of figures that would have kind of represented that European Union. There's an element there that they're fragile. The European Union is quite fragile as well. I think Scotland, had we managed to become independent immediately after Brexit and entered into that, we would have kind of perhaps offered some stability, in the sense that we're one of the very few countries in Europe that have managed to stave off the hard right, electorally speaking. So we were a positive example of what a social democratic left of centre government can do in terms of staving off hard right parties. But there is an element there that the right is engulfing, the extreme right are engulfing Europe as well. So there's a sense of where we go from that here. I think the next 4 or 5 years will be incredibly tenuous in terms of how we all move forward. But actually, I think we need to begin to recognise that the hard right is beginning to change our ideological discourse, and that's a big, massive struggle that we have in Scotland now in order to stave that off and protect our vulnerable communities.
Yes, yeah. So, So,
Can
shall
I
we go
add
to
a wee bit to that, please, Nadia?
Yes,
Because,
please.
I see absolutely where Siobhan's coming from in that. And the European Union as an institution does have to look to itself and does have to make some changes. What we shouldn't forget, though, is that it's quite a big union now, and there are a lot of very small independent nations in there. A lot of them with their own regions that are recognised in devolution settlements. a lot of voices in there that I think Scotland could be part of to try and steer the European Union in a much better direction. So yeah,
Thank you.
I think there are issues to come. I think they have to look to themselves, but I absolutely believe that some way of sticking together as a European continent is very, very important. The way the world is going out with that.
Thank you for that input. Let's get on to the next topic, and it's about Scottish budget agreed to set past this week, and the Creative Scotland announced record multi-year funding to arts organisation in Scotland, while arts funding in UK has been cut. Would you like to talk about it, Linda? Would you like to go first, or?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I was really pleased to see that because the culture of a nation and its creativity is hugely important, and it underpins so many other things because it gives a sense of identity, a sense of well-being to the people within that nation. They know who they are. I mean, one thing I would like to just sort of lay on the table is that, you know, people think of culture and the creative arts and they think of all sorts of airy-fairy nonsense that goes on. But we shouldn't forget that it encompasses so many, many things. You know, that the budget that Angus Robertson, the minister, announced ties in with many other things as well. I was at a big Gaelic event last night, for example, in Celtic Connections. Now that was part funded by the Scottish Government. Um, the the Western Isles, the funding they get both in infrastructure and language and tourism, that's all part of our culture as well, because that's what makes us a whole nation. The fact that the Scots language is now getting promoted too, part of our culture. And then at the other end of that, you have, for example, the national companies like Scottish Opera, Scottish Ballet, and Scotland's orchestras. They're going out the world promoting Scotland, out to the world promoting Scotland with their excellence, their artistic excellence. That is also part of our culture. And then when you look at small theatre groups, small political theatre groups, we don't have as many as we had. I'd like to see more of a rise in that. Again, part of our culture. But so are the libraries, part of our culture. So are so many community events that go on in communities right across the Scotland. Our museums, our galleries, that is all part of the culture of a land, hugely, hugely important. And I am really pleased that the Scottish Government has made this announcement and said our culture is important, our people are important, and they are all one. And that's how we'll move forward as a nation.
Sorry, yeah, Siobhan.
Yeah, I mean, it is clearly a massive welcome from the Scottish culture and arts sector. As a local councillor, I sit on the board of the DCA, and you know the sigh of relief because obviously they had received funding, but it's the multi-year funding. I think that's part of
Yeah,
that. It's offered stability. So I think it's 141 of those organisations that are receiving
Yes,
funding
yeah.
get multi-year 3 years of funding, sorry, and that allows them a bit of space to breathe. It allows them a bit of stability in order to kind of resettle and manage and how they manage their kind of working forward in terms of their creativity and so forth. So it is massively welcomed. It comes, I think, slightly with a caveat via Westminster, and it's something that, you know, I talked about the barriers to economic growth and never mentioned this, that the national insurance contributions, of course, will have an impact on the funding that's there, because some of that money will be funneled out in terms of if you're employing people, then of course the increase in national insurance contributions will kind of have an impact on the third sector as well as the cultural sector as well. So the Scottish Government funding is actually extremely generous, but some of that will have to go to, you know, kind of fill in the gap that's been made by the national insurance policy and budget that the UK Labour met Westminster done. So great that the Scottish Government has done that. And I think Linda's point, of course, is that it's it's often seen as high art, and much of it is, but there's a lot of kind of groundwork there. And the 251 organisations across the board have received that funding. And it'll be the kind of big hitters like DCA, but it'll also be those small projects that can actually be enhance kind of communities and resilience within communities as well. So it's a massive, massive thanks. And I think the words were record funding, transformative, sigh of relief was kind of
Yeah.
across the board as the cultural sector felt that they were kind of like almost on their knees in terms of the cuts and the kind of cost of living crisis and so forth as well. So it is a massive thanks and a massive
Scottish
positive cultural
Parliament,
injection.
Scottish government,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
From the Scottish
And
Parliament. Yes,
yeah,
from the
and
Scottish
UK
government.
Parliament,
Yeah.
UK government is not providing any of these kind
No.
of funding for England or
No.
Wales, and we have to talk about how Scotland is providing these kind of fundings, is very important ones for the Scottish people, while we have to find that fund from somewhere, because in UK it is not spending this funding, so would you like to talk about
there's
it?
a lot of theatre companies in Wales have had to close down.
Yeah.
And the English Arts Council has been up in arms for a long, long time. And there's various mergers of different theatres and things going on across England as well. Yeah, the arts in England and Wales, because they're funded by the UK government and through the Welsh government devolution settlement, they're having a really hard time. I think Shona Robson and John Swinney have done great things with this budget, and it just makes you think how much they could do
Yes,
if
yeah.
we could take the major decisions, and what a different place we could live in.
And I assume because the UK government is not funding on this particular art and aid funding, so Scottish government, they are funding, but there is a level of cutters there, and we have to find that money from some other avenues as well. And we have to mention the Scottish government is doing everything they can to provide to the Scottish people. And Siobhan, would you like to talk about this difference in cutting and the funding, how it is coming from?
Because I actually think it's part of a bigger picture, and one of the things that the Labour Party never understand within Scotland, and even at a local council level in my council, is that they seem to kind of think that the Labour Party, because they're historically kind of embedded in equality and socialist principles, etc., that somehow they're still working on that process, but they're not. I think the difference with the Scottish government is that they build resilience, they build social values into the system. They don't. If you look at Rachel Reeves' comments recently, growth, it's all about this kind of miniature economic process that somehow will trickle down and help build a better society. The Scottish government look at it entirely differently. They'll look at it in terms of growth, in terms of resilient sectors, the third sector, the cultural sector, the NHS. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has just noted that, of course, the uptake of funding in the NHS is much higher in Scotland than it is across England because of those budget decisions that make. Scottish government's priorities are different, and actually, and this is where the Labour Party will never understand of the SNP, it's rooted in equality. It's rooted in resilience of communities. It's rooted in safety and safety of vulnerable communities. And that's where the decisions are made around that. Shona Robinson's budget was an absolute stotter. I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of the Scottish government that they've built those priorities into Scottish society, and I think we will be better off for it. The problem we have, of course, is that we are surrounded by a right-wing economic model that constrains us enormously. But within that power structure that we have, our priorities, I think, are right. It's why I joined the SNP. It's why I kind of became a councillor for the SNP, because they were rooted in a social democracy and in equality that I don't think the Labour Party even touches in their economic and social policies at this moment in time.
And I assume, these kind of funding is going to help us in overall economic benefit for Scotland, such as like tourism and everything, because, we get this tourism comes because to see our culture and, engage in and stuff like that. Would you like to talk about that, Linda?
Yeah, I think that's back to how we opened this discussion. Like, you can't
Yeah.
see these things in isolation. And you're absolutely right, Nadia. Our culture promotes our outward face to the world. When we talk about the national, the national theatres and our national orchestras, ballet, our opera, they're very, very well thought of globally. So that's our outward part to the world, and that will attract people to Scotland. It's, as you say, that tourism, and people come and they see the local culture, they see our
Yeah.
languages, they see our galleries, they see our museums, not just the big national ones, but the small ones in towns and villages right across the land. And they see our culture in terms of singing and dancing, our traditional music. The massive Celtic Connections Festival, it's just become larger and larger all the time. It attracts great tourism, but every bit as important. It gives a great sense of well-being to so many people that live in Scotland. And again, education's another thing that comes into this,
Mm.
because culture and education are linked as well. Not just about the national companies visiting schools and the education programmes that they all do. Small theatre groups, community arts, volunteers right across the country that do all these things. Even things like the Burns competition that we have every year in school, that's all part of our culture too. So it's bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's part of our education, it's part of our general well-being, so that's health, and it's part of our economy when you look at tourism and everything else. So yeah, it underpins so much. And what Siobhan said is absolutely right. It's about building from the bottom up instead of giving everything to those at the top and hoping that some of it just trickles down. So yeah, it's the right way to go.
Can I maybe just come in and make an addition to that? Because I think what Linda said is
Yeah, sure.
absolutely brilliant. But I'm kind of, I'm a historian to trade, and I've looked at the kind of the kind of social movements that exist. But culture and art is one of the most significant ways in which a country can see itself, and we're
Yeah.
reflected. Our country's views, how we see, our attitudes, our social mores, they're reflected in the art and culture that actually is created. It's often a template as to where our country is. So in terms of our self-awareness, culture and art become very, very important. You look at, I think it was the 20s and 30s, the cultural revival kind of led to the political revival. So culture often becomes a precursor to some social changes because it allows us to see ourselves in that art and explore what our identity is as a nation, as a culture. I think it was culture that led to our kind of nationalist movement. It came from that
Yes.
understanding of where do we sit now? Where are we? Who are we as a country? All those ideas are often explored in their first instance through art and culture, music, novels, poetry, theatre, all those things. It's massively important to the health of a nation, I think, and how we see ourselves. So there's that other broader level, historical level, I think. And I think that investment will hopefully allow us to reassess where we're at this moment in our history and allow us space to understand that.
Yep. Thank you, Siobhan. And it's time for us to wind up today. And it is very informative discussion we had. And thank you so much for Siobhan and Linda. Thank you for coming. And we'll wind up. And thank you all for viewing our news broadcast today. Thank you.